Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of a suitable agency and Sundar Nursery to a wonderful new session of suitable conversations at Sundar Nursery. This series of conversations was first inspired by our love for all things books, and a suitable agency is extremely grateful to everyone at Sundar Nursery for their support and encouragement in making this happen. There would be no suitable conversations without them. And now for the event we've been waiting for. Anuradha Roy is a writer and potter, author of 5 novels. Her first, An Atlas of Impossible Longing, was translated into 16 languages. Sleeping on Jupiter, her third novel, won the DSC Prize for Fiction in 2016 and longlisted for the Man Booker in 2015. All Lives We Never Lived won the 2022 Sahitya Academy Award and was shortlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award. She has been a visiting speaker at Cornell and Cordoba universities, and a Hawthorne writing fellow at Casa Eco, Italy, and a writer in residence in Saint-Nazaire in France. She lives in Ranikhet and works as a designer for Permanent Black, a publishing house she and her husband run, with constant hindrance from 4 canine assistants. Nandini Nair has been an arts journalist for more than 15 years. She is a literary and culture editor of Open Magazine. She has worked previously in the feature sections of the Indian Express and the Hindu. She runs a monthly event in Pune called Talking Books, which brings India's best authors to the city. Let's give a round of applause to our speakers, and over to you both.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Priyanka. Thank you, Suitable Agency, for having us. And thank you so much, Anuradha. I think this has been an opportunity I've been waiting for a long time. I also want to say this is probably the best venue we can have for your books, because your books are so elemental. They're about the earth, they're about the sky, and we have both of them in abundance at Sundar Nursery. I found it interesting when Himali, she's not here today, but she kind of organized this event of Suitable Agency, reached out and she said, it'd be great if you're in conversation with Anuradha. And there's no specific book we're going to talk about. And she came up with a theme, making it all up, which I found very interesting. And I was reading Anuradha's books, and I'm just going to start with a quote, which is from her most recent one. It's called Earth Spinner, and it's about a potter called Elango. And Elango is making this beautiful horse. He's secretly by the river, and his love interest is Zora. And Zora is this woman, she works in a library. Her grandfather is a calligrapher, an Urdu calligrapher. And he's one day talking to her, and he says, "What do you see in me? I still don't know. Everyone calls me wrong-headed to be making pots, driving an auto, earning a pittance. My father had such dreams for me. What kind of insanity is this, he'd keep asking. But I've always been obsessed with making things." Can the same be said about you? Are you obsessed with making things?
Yes, I think, thank you for that introduction. That was lovely. I had actually wanted to call this session the teapot and the watering can, but Himali told me everyone would think that's about children's writing and advised against it. But the reason for calling it the teapot and the watering can was really because I know as a kind of amateur potter that the things you put into the kiln, thinking that you're going to see this beautiful object, usually a teapot, which is the hardest thing to make, comes out after that whole thing with the fire and the electricity running off twice at least during the firing and all of that. It's completely not what you hoped to, not what you planned. And yet you look at it again the second day or the third day and you think that maybe this is not what I set out to make, but it's something different, a different kind of thing has come out, which you now have to understand and accept. And that's how all the writing goes as well. Because when you start out with an idea, the finished book is so far away from what you had really wanted to do. And that happens over a series of drafts. And I do see the writing as a making of the kind I'm doing in the studio as well.
So, in fact, that just takes me to the next question. What would you say are the similarities between sculpting and writing? Is it a series of repeated sort of redrafts and chiseling away and making it finer and better. And then also, I think, again, like Elango, when he finally sees his creation, like you said, he can't believe he's made it, right? So there is a bit of, it is yours, but it's also not yours. It's become something bigger than that.
It's very. I just came back from Elora yesterday, so my head is sort of filled with that place. And I was reading up about it, and apparently there's an inscription where the architect who did the Kailash temple at the end looked at it and said, "Did I really make that?" And that's the feeling Elango has when he's made that horse, that he can't believe that he made it. And for me, that becomes a very rueful sense. At the end of the book, I think, oh, did I do that? And will I ever be able to do that again? So but the question that you asked about the similarity between pottery and writing is, I mean, at a metaphorical level, of course, you could find many similarities, like the clay starts as a pail of slop, and then you translate it into, first you transform it into kneadable clay, and then by various degrees it becomes a beautiful pot. And that's roughly how writing begins, with a few images or ideas, and then bit by bit you feel helpless. A lot of the time you think this is not going to add up to anything, but then somehow it does, if it does. But that apart, I think just the making of the pots gives me a sense of, being quiet and alone, and knowing that just the sheer repetition again and again and again is ultimately going to let me do that thing a whole lot better.
You spoke about how, books come from certain images. So then I'm just curious, what was the image that kind of led to Earth Spinner? What was the starting point for that?
In the Earth Spinner, it really was the horse. And like Elango has a dream, in the Earth Spinner, he is a potter, and he wakes up from a dream in which he sees a horse that's on fire. And it has fire coming out of its nostrils and its eyes and everywhere. And for a little while, he doesn't know what he's seen, but then he realizes he's seen this giant terracotta horse being fired, a kind of horse who has been made before by his potter ancestors for religious reasons, but which he is making for a different reason altogether. He's going to make, because once he has this dream, he's obsessed with translating it into an actual made object. And for me, this dream of the horse was, I kept thinking about this image of this horse on fire, and I wondered, where does it fit in and then the whole novel grew around him.
Right. Wonderful. I want to sort of talk a little bit, again, we will move beyond Earth Spinner as well, but I just feel since that's the most recent one. When you look at any novel, it's essentially a play with time, right? And I think Earth Spinner is a great example of it, because you also have two point of views. You have the narrator, who is a young woman called Sarayu, and it starts with her at university. And she's also a potter, and she became a potter because Elango, helped her along the way and taught her how to make little teacups, etc. And then she goes to university and she finds that pottery for her is a way of escape as well. And then you also have her voice. So you have the third person perspective, and then you have her voice. So just, maybe it's a slightly technical question, but in terms of writing, how do you decide where to move and how to move in terms of different points of view?
I think you're talking about the whole shape and architecture of the novel. That's the hardest part, of course. Because initially when I wrote The Earth Spinner, the first draft, it had a completely different structure. And I was alternating much more between past and present. And then when I reached the end, I like to have the book read out to me by the computer, how you have these softwares. So as the computer was reading the book aloud to me, I could see that this is really very confusing. And although I know who is speaking and what is happening, if you were reading it, you would be all at sea at several points. So then I had to rethink the whole architecture of it, so that the business of time was handled in a way that would not be boringly progressing, chronologically, and yet so that events that happened would cast light on what had been narrated before, and yet everything didn't happen in a series. So it's always a difficult thing. And writers have so many different ways of. I always read about other writers and how they've. Uh, so Alice Munro, when she has been asked, "How do you go about writing a story?" and her stories are the size of novellas, of course, and she said she doesn't plan anything. She just says she has a story to tell, and she sees where things fall, and she goes from thing to thing to thing, and that's how the novella is written. Penelope Fitzgerald, I think, said that she needed to know the beginning and the ending and the title, and then she could structure the whole novel. Whereas people who write thrillers like Henning Mankell, I've heard him speak, and he said he planned absolutely every single thing, and he knew exactly what would happen all along the way. Whereas with me, I have this idea, and I have a sense of, say, I need to reach over there, but I really don't know in between very much what is going to happen. And then I structure it once and then structure it again, and
Till you reach it in a satisfactory manner.
till I feel it's now I'm going to really ruin this if I go on.
But does the destination stay the same, or does that also?
No, that does alter, because as you write and the characters are moving along, definitely, I mean, the whole narrative keeps. I also find that if I know what's going to happen, then I completely lose interest in my own. I feel as if I have to find the book for myself. Otherwise, there's really no point in my plugging on and writing.
I was reading an old interview of yours about your first novel, An Atlas of Impossible Longing. And there you said how a lot of it you wrote in a dummy book because I think you had just moved to Ranikhet, and at that point you didn't even know what you were writing.
Yeah.
So from 2008 to 2023, when you're now an established author, has the method changed, or has the method stayed fairly similar?
It may be something of a superstition, but I do start always by writing into a book. And we don't get dummy books anymore. That's not done. But
But maybe you can explain what a dummy book is.
a dummy book is basically, if you had this book but the pages were all blank, they were books made by the binder, the printer, to show you what was the width of the spine, so you could measure the spine. And now the whole printing technology has changed, so that doesn't happen. But so those blank page things became notebooks for publishers. So now I do write the stuff. When I'm trying to think out some hard bit, or I'm working just on starting a book, then I always write quite a bit by hand into a book. And then when I feel I know where I'm headed, then I switch and just get onto a laptop.
That was also a time, I might be mistaken, when you moved to Ranikhet initially, right? When you first started the method.
Yes.
So do you think moving there has sort of spurred your fiction career? Do you think the location has made a difference, or just...
I don't think that the location to begin with made a difference. But what made a big difference was really the changing of, we were at a big publishing house, both me and Rukun, my husband, we were working together there. Then we left and started Permanent Black, and it was a period of huge instability and a whole lot of uncertainty, when I felt that I didn't know where I was headed at all. And at that time, I suddenly started writing a whole chunk that I didn't know was even a novel. I really don't know where it came from, because the character, the house in it, which was drowning in water, all of that, I hadn't known that I had been thinking about any of this. And I wrote this whole chunk and put it away, and I didn't know what to do with it. Then I showed it to Rukun one day, and he said, "This is very good. So what do you plan to do with it?" And then I thought, okay, and I had never written a novel before. I had never planned to be a writer. So it was all new, and I muddled along, and a lot of it got thrown out, and ultimately the book got written.
Okay. Also, I was intrigued to learn that the first book was rejected many times, and you had a real battle to publish it. And now, of course, looking back, I guess you can laugh at those days. But yeah, what was that like, and how do you look back on it right now?
You know, the irony is, I had thought that here I was a publisher. I had thought it would all be really easy. I would write this book and it would get published. And of course, when you write in English, you want the book to come out also abroad as well as here, ideally. And at that time, here, there wasn't such a big market or there was no agency, for example. So I sent it off. I didn't know anyone in England. I sent it off to places blind. All of them 16 turned it down over a period of a year. Many of them hadn't read it, you could tell. Some had read it but said it didn't work. So I put it away and I didn't think about it. And then I had gone to the London Book Fair. And at a seminar there, by sheer chance, I heard a publisher speak who was not talking about product placement and things like that, but about books. And he was this very elderly Scottish man. And he looked a bit imposing and scary, but I still went up to him. And I said, everybody has turned down my manuscript. Will you read a few pages? So he took away 50 or so pages and he said, I'll come back to you at the end of the festival. And then he accepted it. And then it got published in 16 languages, I think, or 18, yeah. So that was quite a dream. It was, that was amazing.
Again, looking back, do you feel a debut writer has the liberty? Of course, they might be rejected multiple times, but they can write whatever they want, right? Now, with your fifth novel out, do you feel there's certain expectations on you? Do you feel the burden of expectations of what kind of writing you need to do, or what kind of writing publishers expect from you?
I think that you might feel that, but the truth is that when you're sitting down to write, it's just you alone in a room with your, whatever thing has begun to obsess you lately. So even if you know the trend is right now for fiction set in the future, which it is, I know I'm not going to write that. I know what would make my publisher really happy if I came up with A, B, C, D. But that's not how books get written. And after I wrote an Atlas of Impossible Longing, there was huge pressure on me to write a family saga. And the American publisher, in fact, rejected the next book, which was The Folded Earth, because it was not a family saga. And it was Simon & Schuster, and they said, bring us... no, they took Folded Earth. They didn't take Sleeping on Jupiter, because it didn't fit their conception of what I should be writing. But that's not how you can write. You'll write what you will write.
When you say you write what you will write, I think if one was to sort of find a theme or commonality between your novels, they're all set in small towns, whether they're fictional or they're real. So, of course, there's Rani Khet in Folded Earth, but then there's Kumarpet, the sort of the potter's village in Andhra Pradesh, and even Sleeping in Jupiter, it's a beach town. What lures you to them?
I think part of it must be simply the fact that I also live in a small town, and I like the sort of feel of smaller places. But the more important thing, I think, was that, say, when I read books, I used to love reading the Russians when I was young. And when I read those, particularly Dostoevsky or Chekhov, there would be these giant, titanic sort of battles of ideas and personalities happening in some kind of God-forsaken little village with one cottage in it and, 5 more along the way to which you could walk and nothing else around. So I felt that this whole business of a very small backdrop really helped to light up the ideas and characters that you were actually grappling with in the novel. So that's definitely, I find that if I had to do a city in a book, I'm not that interested in cities. So it would be difficult for me to set the kind of book I want to write in a big city.
So was it in a way easier to write about Ranikhet since the city existed and you lived there and it was the city you knew best? Or do you enjoy writing about cities of your mind, which is, for example, the
funniest thing
Potters?
about writing about Ranikhet was the number of people who would meet me in Ranikhet after that and say, "Arey, hum jo dekhte hain, wohi aapne likh diya." So you felt like, it was just something very easy to do, as if you were reporting daily life. But the Ranikhet in the novel was not exactly, to me, the Ranikhet that is there. Well, yeah, it was in a sense, but it also equally wasn't. So the places that I often wonder when I read, I'm a real, I sort of worship Alice Munro in a way that is not normal. But I've been reading a collection of hers called Open Secrets recently. And in Open Secrets, the stories are completely unrelated. And yet you find that different characters in those stories are working at the same piano factory or the same glove factory, or they are in the same town. So through reading all these stories, you get a sense of this town quite strongly, which may or may not exist. I don't know. Maybe it's a Canadian town that exists. So similarly with Ranikhet, it's not a town that really exists in the way it is in the Folded Earth, but it also is.
I'll add as an aside that I was born in Ranikhet, so that's why Folded Earth is my favorite, and I'm Nandini from Nanda Devi. That's how my parents named me. I also want to talk a little bit about, again, the professions that you have in the book, right?
Yeah.
So you have a geologist, you have mountaineers, you have an archaeologist. What is it that attracts you to the? Again, as a reader, I find they're all off the earth in a way. They're off geography. What drew you to these?
I really have no idea. There are things I find very hard to describe or analyze about my own writing. I'm quite good at thinking about other people's writing. But here, if you ask me what I can see later that, okay, these things are to do, but it's not as though I consciously, said I must set a series of people who are similar. Geologist, my father was a geologist. It's possible that because he was so interested in things to do with the earth, that it kind of got into my brother and me quite early, because he would take my brother and me on long walks, and he would it would be like going on a walk with no other person, because he could pick up stones and tell you this is whatever it is, a quartz or a mica or some other. He knew all the minerals and he knew the identity of those stones. So we came to see the earth in a different way. For a short time, for 2 years or so, we lived in Ranchi. Before that, we were in Sikkim and in other parts of Bihar. And in all these places, we would be outdoors a lot. And he would be showing us these things during these walks. So my relationship with, and he would tell us quite a lot about, things of geology which bored us silly at that point. But somewhere they just went very deeply in and made us aware of.
But that sounds exactly like the daughter in the Earth Spinner.
Yeah. A part of the Earth Spinner is there's this whole business of whether a novel is autobiographical or not.
And authors hate being asked that.
I would think that I can't speak for other writers, but of course I draw from my life quite a lot. I mean, my experiences do go into the books, and then they get altered because, that's how fiction gets made gradually. But I wanted this whole business of geology and ceramics and the sense of the earth to be the strongest part of this book. So then I went back in my mind to all those things my father would tell me about, shifting continents and the way the Deccan Plateau got made and all of that. Then all of that did go into the book.
Wonderful. I think, of course, you talk about how the earth is central to your books. You can't talk about the earth without talking about animals. And I think, again, your books are peopled by animals.
Yeah.
just took me to this quote, which again I liked a lot. This is from Folded Earth, and I'm just going to read it out. Until humans came and made antles out of mountains, Divan Saab was saying, looking up at these langurs, the land had belonged to these monkeys and to the barking deer, nilgai, tiger, barasingha, leopards, jackals, and the great hound owl, and even to cheetahs and lions. The archaeology of the wilderness consisted of those lost animals, not of ruined walls, terracotta amulets. Only now and then did we catch a glimpse of the distant past of our forest, when the shadow of the barasingha's horns flitted through the denser woods, or when a leopard coughed at night. It was extremely rare, though not unknown, for wild humans to trust human beings, Divan Saab said. Why should they when we have destroyed their world? I thought that was a really beautiful quote. And just to give you a little bit of context for it, so Divan Sahib is this elderly gentleman in Ranikhet and who knows the animals and knows the plants, etc. But he's talking about Puran, who is this sort of uncivilized man, right? He doesn't shower, he smells, he lives in a cow shed, but he knows animals like no other creature does, like no other human being does. So this was just sort of his viewpoint of Puran. And I found, again, these days when we talk about so much of fiction, there's a lot of concern about what humans are doing to the planet, and we're living in the age of the Anthropocene, and this kind of really, I think, conveys that. So do you think, again, given your concerns in the novel, that fiction just has a greater role? On one hand, I want to ask you that, but also creating a character like Puran who knows the animals better than a wildlife expert might, and also he's a man who is uncivilized, who doesn't fall into the domain of being a cultured human being, etc. So your concern with your sort of, how do you create these characters?
I had this. I'm currently reading quite a lot of books by Sebastian Faulks because I have to do to him what you're doing to me. But he in his new book, which is called The Seventh Son, The Seventh Son is about, it's set in the 2050s, in the future. But what happens in The Seventh Son is that there's a couple who cannot have children, but they want a surrogate mother, so and they can't afford to do this surrogacy thing on their own. So they enter a kind of trial in a lab where they are assured everything will be completely fine. So they have a child by this surrogate mother using what they think is their own sperm and egg. But in fact, the lab has started an experiment, is in a very secret experiment, where they have planted the DNA of a Neanderthal man into the egg of this woman, so that the child that is born is half Homo sapiens and half another species. But what they discover, they keep studying this child as he grows older. And in many ways, he is like Puran, slightly more primitive, what we think of as primitive and not quite human. But they realize also that instead of just these 5 senses, he actually has 8 senses. He can sense many things like animals can, from far away, from the smell, from just a feeling that somebody is in the room or whatever. And that he has a sense of compassion and fellowship with animals that no Homo sapiens ever does. And he's a much gentler and, he's a different kind of human. And the novel's whole conception is of a different kind of society had it not had Homo sapiens, because human beings, it says, are the only ones in the entire world of animals who are capable of insanity and evil. And, so that what we see ourselves as this very advanced kind of species may actually be the opposite, that we are the worst of the species. And in Puran, whom everyone sees as insane and incapable of managing life, he is actually the one man who perceives that the animals in the mountains are much more important than what the administration is trying to do to the mountains. Folded Earth was written in 2011 when, I mean, I could already see that the hills were being completely destroyed. And people saw it as a lot of the people who reviewed and so on saw it as a love story. But it was really, as you say, it was about the land and the animals.
Just talk about Puran again. There's a beautiful relationship between him and a deer.
Yeah.
And it's just so well done. And I think that's a love story as well,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And they separate the deer and Puran, and the deer dies of grief and malnourishment,
Yeah.
but the deer just refuses to eat. I think that comes out really poignantly. I think, of course, we talk about deer, then we have to talk about dogs as well. Again, if we talk about Earth Spinner, there's Chinna, the dog,
Yeah.
who was probably Tashi.
Yes.
Okay. And Chinna is again an indie dog who was adopted by Elango. Elango finds the dog one day. And there's a great evolution, like you talk about novels being, a coming of age story. And in fact, even Chinna has this sort of growing up arc. So initially he's a puppy, and then he becomes a man about town. And then he goes sort of demented with grief when Elango leaves him, and then he kind of reconciles to it, and he's just waiting for Elango eventually as well. So what do you like about writing about animals, or what does that sort of open to you?
I think that, when you're, in a sense, when you're building a novel, uh, very often we tend to look at, say, the big ideas in the novel, the characters in the novel. But I think what you really need also in the novel is a series of, say, images or small things that happen at a level that may not be exactly at the human level or at the direct level of the narrative. But one of the most wonderful instances of using an animal in a book to really set off the whole narrative on a different trajectory is in Penelope Fitzgerald book set in Russia, whose name I'm forgetting. I think I can't remember the name of the book, something in spring, I think. Anyway, so it's set in Russia in about the 20s, I think. And there are two British children who have been sent to a Russian household to be looked after for the day. And in that Russian sort of feudal household, the child wants to impress these British visitors. And he has just been given a bear cub as a gift by his parents. And he starts wanting to make this bear cub drink vodka. So he keeps pouring vodka into a little bowl and feeding this bear cub, who drinks it and gets more and more drunk and keeps, then it's lurching about, and the boy is poking it and saying, dance, dance, why don't you dance? And then while lurching about, the bear cub manages to totter towards the dining room and shatter all the crystal. And then to stop him, the cook comes out and picks up a whole huge pile of coal and throws it at the cub, who is soaked in vodka by now. So the cub catches fire. And so there's this bear cub burning in this room with these children. And what has been so far just a kind of quite funny and sweet domestic drama is suddenly become something that you can't take in all of a sudden. And then that whole thing happens, and then the bear cub is never referred to again in the book. But you know from that point on that anything can happen in this book. So I think when you use these kinds of, things that you can't quite explain, animals who are not quite of our world, then you introduce an element into a novel that gives it a slight edge of mystery. You don't have to understand everything in a novel. So that's what the animals are there for, to give you a sense of something else out there.
Right. Just listening to you talk, it's quite fascinating how many other authors you refer to and how many other books you kind of talk about. So I'm just kind of curious, when you were writing Earthspin, or when you are sort of immersed in a work of writing, are you reading other books at that time, or do you sort of keep all those voices away?
I think, writing a novel deprives you of so many things, like going out to eat lots of good food in other people's houses, and also reading fiction, because when I'm writing fiction, I can't read fiction. Then I really try to I read a lot of poetry when I'm writing, or I'll read non-fiction, but fiction I find is very distracting.
So you read
Because-
fiction only between books?
Yeah, because I find it takes me in completely if it's a good book. And then I can't focus on my own stuff anymore. Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you listen to music? I'm just curious. Or does that
Yeah,
you find that
I
distracting?
do. I listen to music a lot when I'm writing. I listen to sort of, music that won't, not songs and stuff, but other music, because if I don't plug in, music into my ears, then we have 4 dogs in the house who naturally think they're the priority. And so to get my own space, I have to listen to the music.
Because it just reminds me of Helen Macdonald's H is for Haw.
Okay.
And
yeah, I read
that's
that, yeah.
just a gorgeous book. And I mean, that's a memoir, it's not fiction. But when she was writing that, again, she said, I couldn't read anything. The only thing I could read was Shakespeare. And she's like, maybe
Okay.
some of the rhythm of Shakespeare
Yeah.
comes into this book.
Yeah.
But it's this other thing that
Yeah.
you kind of get so absorbed into the world
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
another novel that, you want to stay
Yeah.
away from
Yeah.
that. I just wanted to sort of maybe move a little bit away from writing, because you also, of course, are a publisher and you also are a designer, etc. How did these sort of interests feed into each other? In a way, when you're writing, especially since you're so in this world, aren't you also thinking about products and placement and marketing, or no?
Well, we publish a kind of book which can't be marketed because we do scholarly books. There's not the kind of marketing that fiction and trade books require, which is one of the reasons for us, because both Rukun and I want to live away from the city in Delhi. So, but you're right that, it's different parts of your head work in different ways. I find it quite a relief to design, because it's something I do with a completely other part of myself. And I often, if I'm very tired with, say, half a day of writing, then I'm quite happy to do half a day of design after that, and that's absolutely fine. And the pottery too is like that. It's something else. The writing is the hardest part. It really makes you feel physically exhausted having to, when you're getting through the harder parts of it.
So, for example, in Earth Spinner, they use pottery as an escape. Is pottery your escape, or is writing the escape?
Writing is no escape. Neither is pottery, actually, because the pottery needs a kind of physical dedication and persistence, it's hard work.
Right.
But it's a kind of hard work that's also enjoyable, and which is why I've never tried to really be competitive about pottery, like studios and selling. And people say, I want that to be the non-difficult part of my life. But the writing is, unless the writing is hard, unless you are feeling positively frightened by what you're doing, if you don't have the feeling that you're jumping off a cliff into something unknown, then it won't be something that I would really want to work on at all.
Do you like talking about the book, or not really in the process, or that's just sort of the demands of the job?
Talking
About
what we are doing right now, I don't much like to do that.
Fair enough. Okay, I'll just see if there are any audience questions. Oh, okay.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. This is a real honor, and I've come from many of the suitable agency book programs, but I'm actually in the middle of All the Lives, a book of yours. And it was just, I got the update that you're coming, so it's really strange. I brought the book with me. I just had 1 or 2 points and also maybe questions. One is the choice of Mishkin, the character's name. So I thought that was really beautiful. One reason being, a lot of Indian authors writing in English typically stick to subcontinental names, so as to speak. I think except for Gogol and Jhumpa Lahiri, I've not come across a Russian name. And I think this is Dostoevsky, the idiot. So that was, I loved the combination of cultures. But my question on this one was there a particular inspiration, or were you deep in Dostoevsky that this name came up for this character? And my second question, and the thing that made me a fan, so as to speak, and it's hard for me to, I come from a family of writers, and my mom taught English lit in Delhi University for 40 years. So except for maybe the great Russians and Mirza Ghalib and Shakespeare, what really got me in your book was Begum Akhtar Road. So I love the way you went from Mishkin to Begum Akhtar, and which brings me, and I'm a student of Hindustani classical, and for me, she's like the ultimate. So coming to your music question, it sounded like you were very passionate about the Begum Saiba. Is that something you listen to? And the fact that you go from Mishkin fighting to get Begum Akhtar Road with the Gulmohar flowers, that was just exquisite. And I wanted to know, like, was there a particular inspiration, or were you listening to a Thumri or something that it came up, or what? So those were just the two questions. And thank you so much for that book. I brought it with me. Yeah, thank you. I'm
Thank you.
Leher
That's
Zabi,
an
by the way.
interesting question.
Yeah, thank you.
The name Mishkin, you're right, it's from The Idiot, it's the prince. And the prince had this sort of blend of innocence and so it was the prince, and I wanted his sort of lovely innocence in this character right from the start of, sort of not knowing what to, okay, he's a kind of saint in the book. So that was the part with the name, and Begum Akhtar was really, it was a kind of, there are often hidden things in the book which are either jokes or tributes or things that only a friend will recognize. And Begum Akhtar was really to remember a friend of mine. She was one of my authors called Sheila Dhar when I was at the OUP. And she became a very dear friend, and she would talk to us about, tell us many stories about Begum Akhtar, which stayed with me. So that was how I really wanted that sense of Mrs. Dhar and of what she told us about Begum Akhtar to be there in the book. And then when I was writing the book, I did listen to a lot of her Thumris to get because there's more of Begum Akhtar later on in the book, as you'll find. And the two things came together in that way.
Ma'am, I just completed my PhD on all your novels. So I just have one question. Like, what does the theme sleeping on Jupiter mean? Like, I am so confused. Like, what does that mean, sleeping on Jupiter? Like, what does it symbolize? Like, Nomita, like, how does it symbolize?
Well, in the book, you'll find that there's the character called Badal.
Yeah.
Who is feeling very lost in the world he inhabits.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, he works in a temple where he has to follow certain rules and rigidities set in stone, and yet his own sexual longings are completely against those that are at that temple.
Badal and Surya.
Yeah, and he begins to dream of an alternate place where he could be without any of these competing and clashing things. And for him, he begins to wonder about how it would be on Jupiter to sleep under the many moons of Jupiter, and whether that was the kind of reality that it's a kind of fantasy world and land for him. It's a cry of help in a sense for him.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Since you've done a PhD, do you have more questions? I think go ahead.
Actually, I have already found the research questions. So I already researched a lot.
No, that's amazing.
It took me almost 4 years to complete my PhD. Thank you.
Thank you again, Anuradha, so much. And again, I'm so happy we could do this under the trees.
Thank you, Nandini, for coming all the way from. And thank you all for coming out on this very cold and grey day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.